Welcome, everyone, to our session today, Curbing Compassion Fatigue, Skills for Building Empathy and Wellness. My name is Deborah Spence, and I'm an Assistant Director at the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, better known as the COPS Office. I am really pleased to be here today with this panel, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I hope you will all enjoy how we have chosen to set this up more as a conversation than a series of lectures. I'm joined here today by some very thoughtful people. First, we have Jared Seid, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Counsel. Then I'm also pleased to introduce Dr. Ann Seid, a Doctor of Integrative Medicine. We also have Ron Kinji, recently retired from the Los Angeles Police Department. And you can read all of our bios in the conference materials. And for this recorded session, we have also invited two of Sergeant Kinji's colleagues from the LAPD to help ensure we have a lively discussion. Those are Senior Lead Officers Gabe Flores and Lyndon Barber. This session has grown out of a partnership that the Center for Counsel and the COPS Office entered into a little over a year ago, after realizing that we had common interests and goals and the ability to help each of our organizations advance their missions. Our MOU states that we are going to work collaboratively and contribute our respective expertise and resources in order to increase law enforcement awareness of the intersectionality of wellness, procedural justice, and community building. And today, we aim to share a conversation about this with all of you. What we hope you in the audience will take away from this is that while we are largely talking about one unique and highly successful program, our intent is to give you a sense of what this program is doing more globally and what facets seem most effective to include in a successful, impactful, sustainable, and well-rounded wellness program for law enforcement personnel. What we all believe is that working on building skills for wellness has an impact on individual officers and their work-life balance. But additionally, skill mastery by individuals can positively affect agencies as workplace organizations and the relationship skills brought to communities. When we build skills for empathy and resilience, we can help everyone, officers and community members, stay safe and well. The downstream impacts of working this way are skilled, compassionate interactions with coworkers and communities. At my office, we have long been interested in promoting the principles of procedural justice as key to safe and just communities. And the ability to provide voice and feel as though you are being heard are central ideas to procedural justice, both within police organizations and with the wider community. The exciting thing is that the ability to communicate, to listen, and be empathetic is not an innate trait. These are teachable and rehearsable skills, and the more we train them, the healthier we can be as human beings. I must confess that in our effort to make our session sound as appealing as possible, we were a little disingenuous in the title, and that seems like the place we should start, by setting the record straight, as it were. The title of the session refers to compassion fatigue. This is a commonly used phrase to describe the exhaustion that can overtake people in a variety of caring professions. But Jared, you don't like the term compassion fatigue, do you? Can you start us off by explaining why and what you believe we really mean when we say that?
Yeah, this has really become kind of a pet peeve for me. And I keep coming back to it because I think that words are important. I think we really need to stop using the phrase compassion fatigue. It's a really misleading and unfortunate mixture of words, and it really misses the point. These are the wrong words. They give the wrong impression, and I think it's important to understand why that is. Compassion is wise and fierce and discerning, and it's sustainable by definition, because it includes consideration of how we're doing. And I think that's a critically important point here. And I think if we think about the way we use words, it's important to maybe look at a couple of definitions. These are words that often get conflated, they get confused, we use them interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. These words, sympathy, pity, empathy, and compassion. So sympathy is about recognizing that somebody is suffering and maybe, feeling bad for them, understanding that there's some suffering going on. Pity adds some distance and maybe a little disdain, a little bit of the sort of poor you sort of thing. There's a sort of a negative cast to that. And empathy kind of does the opposite. It moves towards an understanding of the feelings of others. You get their perspective. Maybe you even feel bad with them. Compassion is completely different. Compassion means we sense the suffering We seek to understand the suffering, and we resolve to do something about it that benefits the other, that benefits the whole situation, and that keeps us intact. Compassion includes discernment, attunement, action, and self-care. We don't ignore our own suffering in this. It's like, the airplane admonition, secure your own oxygen mask first. It's kind of trite, but it's important to understand there's no room in compassion for fatigue. If you're fatigued, do something about it. That's what compassion is asking of us. Compassion requires that we take care of ourselves and step away if we're overwhelmed. Similarly, I have to say the word fatigue in compassion fatigue is really inaccurate as well. It's not this, we're being tired. We're not feeling like we need to take a nap. And it's much more complicated than that. The word fatigue is a sort of a catch-all for a lot of things that require a lot more nuance and a better understanding, because there are better words to describe what's going on with folks. Folks are feeling demoralized and disillusioned. They're feeling a sense of betrayal, a sense of devastation, a sense of collapse. These are heavy words, and they describe a really significant and destructive condition that's a lot more than just being tired. Folks are overwhelmed, often to the point where they feel like there's just no way out. We all know that depression and anxiety and suicidality are unthinkably commonplace. And I'm sure you're all aware of this. Here in California, there was a day in November where 4 LA Sheriff's Department officers died by suicide on the same day. It's unthinkable. We are in a crisis. And frankly, I think it's lazy to refer to all of these dispositive states as fatigue. I think it minimizes the problem. When we choose to work in law enforcement, we subject ourselves to enormous risk. And that's sometimes obvious, and sometimes it can be more subtle. But generally speaking, we intend to do the right thing, and our lack of skillfulness can lead us to dangerous and destructive places.
Can you talk about some of these dangerous risks that officers face that are more subtle than the tactical challenges that they encounter in the line of duty that we more generally think of? I've heard you in the past use the expression edge states, for example. What are edge states?
Dr. Joan Halifax is a renowned expert on compassion. She wrote a book called Standing at the Edge, and she described 5 of these edge states that are involved when we attempt to act with compassion in complex situations. These are things we have to be aware of when we show up to extreme situations and we want to do the right thing. There is some dangerous terrain to traverse, and we're walking along a cliff, and we can fall off the edge if we're not careful and if we've not developed the proper skills. Let's look at these states that she talks about. These are all, highly esteemed qualities. We can all agree that we should aspire to maintain all of these, but maintaining and acting with these qualities is more perilous than we often acknowledge. Altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, engagement. These are things that involve doing good, being selfless and generous, caring about what we do. Of course, we believe that that's positive. Empathy involves resonance, understanding the other's perspective, maybe feeling their pain. We talk about integrity. We want folks to have a sense of justice, a moral code, knowing what's right and what is ethical. Respect, of course, we ask folks to honor the people we protect and serve, have a sense of valor, admiration for positive behavior, and obviously we want folks to function with enthusiasm for the job, a sense of purpose and motivation and commitment. The problem is we often don't think about what happens to most of us as we seek to act with these highly valued qualities. And many of us inadvertently fall into a big trap. And I just want to mention it because it's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. Altruism on the surface looks great, but pathological altruism is when we're doing or giving just too much. We've extended ourselves in a way that's taking too much of a toll. It's starting to eat away at us. We're getting stuck in this idea of a hero complex, and it's causing us to actually suffer in a way that is unsustainable. you talk about empathy, there is such a thing as empathic distress. And that's often what people mean when they hear compassion fatigue. But empathic distress means that we followed someone down the rabbit hole who we cannot save, we probably cannot help, and their helplessness causes us distress. We suffer vicariously, and often we can get stuck in that. And that's a problem. Integrity. The flip side of integrity is moral suffering. And I think folks can relate to this if you think about those times where we have to do something that we know is wrong, or we're not able to do the right thing because it goes against policy. This can kind of tear us up, and we get ourselves into a pretzel. And this moral suffering can really eat away at us. Respect seems on the surface to make a whole lot of sense, but if we take the side of the people who deserve respect and we really support them, then we are sort of subconsciously creating in ourselves a disparagement for those who don't deserve respect. There's always those who don't meet our standard, and yet we have to protect and serve everybody. So what does it mean when we've depersonalized those who we don't find to be worthy of respect? And finally, engagement. Clearly we want folks to be engaged, but when we've exhausted everything and we have nothing left in the tank, we're no good to anyone, including ourselves. It's important to understand that this is a more complex topic. These are examples of edge states and falling off the cliff. And if we don't prepare folks, if we don't train them to work skillfully with all of these states, they can do great damage, both to themselves and to others. These can be subtle, they can creep up on you, but they're really dangerous and destructive states. And they arise not because folks are bad people. They're usually good people who are trying to do the right thing and who don't have the skills to navigate this really complicated terrain. It's just not accurate to reduce this to compassion fatigue. The situation is far more complex and more dire. It requires real skillfulness and training to navigate a career in which all this stuff shows up regularly and can sometimes really take us down. We're not just fatigued. We are in a crisis. We feel defeated in ways that we're often unable to recover from unless we have proper training and the right skills on board.
I would like to quickly turn to our officers here and see if this resonates with them and their experience. And Ron, I'll start with you.
Absolutely, everything was that Jared was talking about. I've learned a lot about myself with just those things. And what I've learned is that as an officer, to understand others, or basically to understand yourself a little bit better, to understand your unit that you're working with, your fellow officers a lot better. It helps you have a better dialogue, with the community out there. It helps you connect and be present a lot more for that community. I have to agree, this is not compassion fatigue. There are a lot of things that we go through as officers that, that we need to talk about, that we need to be open about and have discussions about to better ourselves so that we can better serve the community.
Gabe, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I agree that getting to know yourself is very important because you got to know your limits, right? Know when you need that break and when you're going to react and how you're going to react. So I do believe that once you know yourself and your limits and how you feel, then that changes and will dictate the interaction you're going to have with the community.
So it sounds like we're saying that to mitigate the risks of empathy fatigue and these other negative states, that there are concrete skills that people, or officers specifically, can learn and practice to help them be more healthy, more resilient. And I'd like to turn to you on this. Can you describe some of the skills that officers need to build to flourish, and talk about how this approach in power training is different?
Sure, and maybe if I take a bit of a moment to talk about what integrative medicine is. From my perspective, it means that we realize that the key to better health is realizing that there isn't a single key, that complex systems like our bodies, our relationships, even the the systems in society that we live and work in are complex adaptive systems. And so health and disease come about because of a bunch of intersecting factors, not just one problem. And if we look at the downside health-wise of all of those 5 edge states that Jared talked about, we realize it's not enough to prescribe a pill or a breathing practice or a guided meditation or just tell people to get more sleep. We need an integrative health approach. So integrative means that we bring to bear all possible solutions at the same time, rather than trying to reduce a problem to having one cause and one solution. So if you think about just treating high blood pressure, you might go to see your physician and they'll prescribe a medication, but how much better if you also change what you eat, you address your exercise regimen, you pay attention to mind-body practices, getting enough sleep, in addition to the medication, the blood pressure is going to be much better controlled. We also recognize that people have different needs and different interests and different abilities, and that officers have already developed some really positive ways of dealing with stress. And so part of what we've developed in this program that we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute are ways for people to share those things with each other, either being on the receiving end of getting advice from somebody who has navigated a difficult situation in a good way, or being the person that offers the advice. There's benefit both ways. People change more in relationship rather than having an expert tell them to do something. And so the POWER training, POWER stands for Peace Officer Wellness, Empathy, and Resilience. And there's decades of research that talk about the benefits of breathing and meditation and mindfulness and diet. So we built POWER around this data, along with training in a particular practice called counsel that we're going to talk a lot more about as we go on. As these guys are saying, it's important to get to know yourself. Part of getting to know yourself is recognizing when your body is stressed and what it does when it's stressed. So our autonomic nervous system has a sympathetic branch that's the fight, flight, or freeze, and a parasympathetic branch, which is the rest, digest, and discern. And, the world that we live in, especially people in careers like law enforcement, is in a sympathetically driven world where we are stressed continuously. And it can be difficult to turn that off. We can't just walk away. And so it's actually more effective to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system. It's sort of like a gas pedal brake analogy. You can't always take your foot off the gas, but sometimes you can apply the brake. A lot of what we teach people in POWER is different practices and techniques for activating the parasympathetic nervous system or putting on the brake. And in doing this, they regain this healthy cyclicity, because stress has its advantages, and being able to work with it and be healthier comes about as when you learn some of these techniques. Next, a short video with some officers talking about some of their experience of the POWER program.
You don't walk away from a homicide. You don't walk away from seeing somebody's life being taken. That stays in your reel in your mind. How do you take care of yourself when those things happen?
To have a program that said, okay, we're going to take pause and we're going to focus on your health, your stress levels, your family, and how to deal with these things, I thought it was perfect timing.
I wasn't getting any sleep because my mind is constantly just racing, thinking of 1,000 things. I don't do that anymore.
To be present, not to be rushing, to take things one day at a time, listen to your body, which I wasn't doing before, and I feel relaxed. I noticed a difference.
For me, I think it was the meditation and breathing, which kind of forces you to be present. The mindset of being present, for whatever reason, slowed the game down.
I didn't believe in stuff like that. I didn't really, honestly, I didn't. But when we did it in the classroom and I saw how it helped me personally, I was like, oh crap, there is something to this.
As police officers, we're tough guys, tough girls. We see so much and we just push on through instead of dealing with that trauma, instead of dealing with that stress that we're very unaware of. So now I'm very aware of it,
and I want to talk about these things.
So I'd like to turn to Gabe and Lyndon and Ron, and you were all part of a power cohort at LAPD, and I'd really like to hear from each of you what was a big takeaway. What did you notice about its impact on you, either personally or about how it impacted the team that you work with?
So it made me feel and understand when we're in the circle. It made me feel what other people were talking about. I was trying to see myself in their shoes and better understand where they were coming from, and how would I feel if I was in their shoes when whatever happened to them affected their life. And I can speak for our team that were Ron and Lyndon. We all worked together, and that just made us come closer and be able to better understand each other and be able to say, you know what, hey, I'm tired today, man. I give me like 10, 15 minutes. And that way my mind can, kind of restart and feel that fresh air coming in your nostrils and your lungs, and just a reset. And then when you come back out, you're able to hear them better, more clear. And when we go to the next radio call, you're able to see more clearly and be able to understand, okay, this is a tactical situation. Once that is cleared, we can actually go into the victim and find out what we can do for them. How can we better assist them by better understanding how they would feel, right? And that all starts for me with this type of training.
Lyndon, how about for you?
For me, I think it's a two-part. I know Anne mentioned it in the sense of getting information from experts to solve versus relating it to other peers. That was a really big takeaway in the circles as far as sharing having those vulnerable conversations and then connecting with other team members that may have went through the same situation kind of thing. And I feel like that built a huge connection within the team. And then the deep breathing, I know I mentioned it in the post video, but I felt that was a huge takeaway, and the ability to be present and available, and like having like a heightened awareness, personal life, and definitely applying that to work life. Gabe mentioned in a tactical situation or whatnot. I know I've used it in a very chaotic situation at work, and the breathing exercises. I guess the more you exercise and do it, it's kind of becomes second nature, but it does help tremendously. And again, having that ability to be present in the moment helps in the field.
And Ron, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. At first, yeah, it was strange. This is something that we've never done before. But, once Jared explained the process, the science behind it, took us through the breathing exercises, we were instantly feeling a lot more relaxed, and we were very, very interested. When we had these huddles, we all had the opportunity to have a voice. We all felt, heard. We all felt very comfortable with each other because, there was no sense of judgment of each other. So we were able to be vulnerable. And how often as law enforcement are we able to be vulnerable? And it actually felt good to be vulnerable. I'm not a very vulnerable person. You can probably ask my wife that and my kids, but I think that we are in a better situation with the family because I allow myself to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable, and that's what we learned. I think you can ask these two guys right here, but it allowed me to be a better supervisor as well, I think, because in hearing what they had to say, I was able to learn a lot more about them as well, things that I didn't know. In turn, we had a better, deeper connection with each other. Doing this type of training, especially with the huddles and being involved with each other like that, it put my officers in a better state of mind to better serve the community. It allowed us to continue to dialogue with each other, which in turn allowed us to have a better dialogue with the community.
Thank you. Those are some really compelling testimonies. Thank you very much. And they do really correspond to what we can see in some of the publicly available reports on the early pilots from a number of other participants. And we'll talk a little bit more about those reports and the research that's been done in a few minutes. But before we do that, Jared, can you describe the approach in the power training in a little more detail for us?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. This is a very robust program. This is a deep dive. This is 12 weeks of work, 3 months from start to finish. That's a long period of time. It's cohort based, so you have 20 to 25 sworn or non-sworn participants, depending on the department and its needs. And this includes 4 full training days. That's 8-hour days in person, but they're spread out over the 3 months. In between, there are these weekly online assignments that have all kinds of activities and podcasts and videos and articles and journaling. And these weekly peer-led council huddles, which we're going to talk about more, are 5 or 6 officers getting together on their own so that each one has a voice. As Gabe was saying, I think there's something really compelling about being with your peers and speaking frankly and vulnerably. So that happens weekly. This was developed in partnership with California Post. It was nationally certified by IACP. It has undergone a whole lot of research, and we're really excited to talk about that. Generally speaking, the POWER program addresses 4 planes of awareness, we call them. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about what these are.
Yeah, we go through the 4 different planes because health can be looked at as physical health, mental, emotional, or energetic or spiritual health. We go into each of these in the in-person times, but then there's also 3 weeks of the curriculum that's spent in each quadrant. In the physical, for example, we talk a lot, like I said before, about the autonomic nervous system. We go into diet and some of the exciting current research about the gut microbiome, how what you eat affects your mental health. Then when we specifically get into mental health, we talk about bias, which is a kind of loaded word, but it can be as simple as the way your brain is made is the way you see the world. You have a salience map. You're sort of programmed to see things the way your brain has been taught to see them. And so going into a situation that is potentially dangerous, it can be very valuable to have cultivated curiosity so that your salience map gets bigger and you have different options. When we get into the weeks on emotional health, we talk about what it means to be dysregulated, and maybe more importantly for this population, what it means to be cut off or to shut down your emotions, which can be a really effective tool in situations where you're constantly brought up against people who are suffering. But when that bleeds over into your home life, it can be really detrimental. Finally, we get to the last 3 weeks, the energetic and the spiritual. And we talk about what the zoom out approach does. We talk about the value of cultivating a sense of awe, this realization that you're small in relation to everything else is a really valuable emotional state to be in because it allows you to have the potential for change. And when you're faced with situations that are very demanding, the ability to be flexible and to change is really valuable.
I think it's important to just name the domains that we train in. We believe that these domains protect health, they optimize performance, and they improve agency culture. Mastering these areas really moves the needle in terms of officer wellness. This is where the science is pointing us. So I just want to quickly mention what we pay attention to. We pay attention to attention. What does it mean to be present? How do we focus on the situation at hand? How do we include our own internal state as we are approaching a situation and expand our awareness to include the totality of circumstances? How do we develop an appropriate mindset, as these guys have said? That's complex, but it's learnable. How do we become healthier in terms of our habits and practices regarding the food we eat, the sleep and the exercise we get, the relationship we have to intoxicants? We need to figure out what a good relationship to those things means. How do we manage overwhelm? What is physical overwhelm, emotional overwhelm, mental overwhelm, and even spiritual overwhelm? What does it mean to have that sort of crisis of faith? And how do we work with that? How do we recognize it? Stressors. Stress is always there. It's always coming at us. And like Anne said, it's not always a bad thing. It's not always negative, but we can create a skillful relationship to stress. And we can avoid maladaptive responses to stress. So abuse of alcohol and other intoxicants, violence, hypersexuality. There are a lot of things we do that we think are addressing stress, and they're actually making the situation a bit worse. We need to think about improving communication and relationships. How do we listen more fully and speak more authentically on the job and in our life in terms of navigating work-life balance and with the communities we serve? We have to really give some thought to how we recover and recommit to our intentions, why we do what we do, what our legacy is, what brought us here in the first place. Sometimes we lose sight of that. And finally, there needs to be a sustainable resource, something that we can access regularly and not just after a critical incident. You know, peer support can be great, but it's often sort of too little too late. And it needs to be integrated into the culture of an agency. You've heard this term council huddles, and we feel like that's really the key. This is how we understand this idea of peer support that's prior to a critical incident. These are structured and directed, but they're peer facilitated small group conversations. And they offer the opportunity to be with your peers. There are no experts there. These are folks with relatable life experiences on the job with you. They offer accountability because people notice you and they expect you to be there, and they miss you when you're not there. And frankly, they notice when something is off. And sometimes that moment of noticing like something's going on here can be critically important in terms of somebody's future choices and might even save a life. They promote this relationality because folks build bonds in these groups and they learn to create supportive relationships. And I think most importantly, and going back to something that Ron said, they normalize talking honestly about important and sometimes challenging things. And when we have the courage to do that, we often find that we are moving closer to that relationship with sort of knowing ourselves better.
Anne, I'd like to turn to you. What are these council huddles doing from a physiological perspective?
You know, our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released an advisory almost a year ago, it was last spring, that called out social isolation and loneliness as a national epidemic. The health risks of being isolated are huge. They're more detrimental to your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And they're quite similar to the health risks seen from living in high stress states and that we see law officers dying of at an early age. There are things like heart disease and diabetes and stroke and early onset of cognitive decline and dementia. As we've understood more about the risks of isolation, there's researchers out there like Julianne Holt-Lundstad and Stephanie Cacioppo that are looking at how connection makes us healthier. It's not enough to just say it's bad to be isolated. We need to come up with some solutions. We have plenty of anecdotal evidence from the participants in the POWER program of how beneficial the council huddles were. We now have biometric evidence to support that as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think let's first hear on a video directly from some participants.
I think it started when we first started training and we were sitting in that circle, and each one of us started sharing stories, personal stories that I've never heard from some of these guys. I think that was a door that was open for our unit to start sharing more with each other.
I needed it. I needed that circle. I was going through it tough, man. That was the worst year for me being on the job. I love the officers. and I love my culture, and they were at odds. And I felt like I was in the middle. You know, you take it home, and there's only so much you can put on your wife, because you don't want her to have to deal with that stuff. You know, your friends don't get it. Your parents don't really get it. That circle gave me a chance to open that bottle up and let some of that stuff out, and people were just listening, no judgment, taking it all in, and it gave me hope to have that open forum where I can just say what I want and get it off my chest, because I've been keeping it in also. I saw some of the toughest cops I know, in tears by halfway through the day, and I was one of them, and you don't expect that. You expect everyone to be kind of standoffish. We're cops, we don't really want to put all our business out there like that, but.
I was shocked at how much the officers were able to really express themselves, because generally we kind of keep everything in. We don't really show our feelings too much, because when we work, you can't really do that. It could be the difference between life or death. It was good to see everybody just kind of open up and start to see that we're all kind of going through the same thing, and we all are carrying this baggage.
This is what this training does. It tells you about yourself, stuff that you didn't even know was bothering you, stuff that I'm not gonna even speak about, but you feel the need, the urge to need to get it off your chest, and it helps you. And then that blessing for you is going to bless so many other people that witnesses that and sees that, and they feel what you feel, and they can man, I was going through something similar kind of, and then it's just a snowball effect.
What helped me going through this training was that it defined the way I was feeling. I knew I felt a certain way, but I couldn't express it, or I didn't know the definition of it. Why do I feel like this? Or is it okay to feel like this? I would take things home, take it home to the point where I would get sick or just overwhelmed. At the long run, I realized I was hurting myself.
It was hard for me at first to try to open up, because even though they were coworkers, they were still strangers to me. But after a while, I felt comfortable, and I'm hearing people tell their stories. Okay, well, shoot, if they're brave enough to open up, then okay, I guess I'll open up too.
I found that my colleagues are dealing with the same things that I am, and some of them probably even worse. There's a lot of times, like we say, we don't really express our feelings.
Sitting in the circle and hearing, fellow officers, listening to them, and, yeah, I'm not alone.
I think it's helped me personally in the sense where I'm doing more listening and more of focusing on what's going on now versus what if and the future stuff.
This program helped us all slow down and say, okay, let's try to understand why they have this opinion. And when you take a bigger picture look, it's pretty easy to see.
When I'm getting information that I might not necessarily like or agree with, just be there kind of in the moment, not just be quick to react, just practicing the breathing methods and then thinking before I actually speak, before, I take the next step.
We hide our feelings rather well, but I think if we go to a call, for example, and it's a very dangerous call, take a step back and say, okay, what are we going to do? Don't rush into it. Really think about the process of how to handle that situation. Not only will we be safe, our families will still have us around, more importantly, but the community will be taken care of.
Can count on you.
They could count on us, exactly.
I think most training with LAPD is geared to making the individual a better officer. This training was geared more to making the individual healthier and a better person. But then you flip that and say, well, if you get a better person and a healthier person, you get a better officer.
That's a tremendous last point that was made in that video. Lyndon, I'm curious if you have any additional thoughts about these council huddles and what you saw and learned through them.
Again, I just kind of reiterate knowing oneself. That's the magic part. I guess we're always in the culture of law enforcement. It's all about situational awareness. That's kind of like the word that's thrown out when you're out in the field or whatnot. What enhances that situational awareness is really having this really strong sense of self-awareness. And that's how you can acquire a heightened situational awareness or awareness outside of what's going on outside, but it's really starts from within, and then it just enhances everything else in the outside.
How about for you, Gabe? Did the videos testimonial speak to you as well?
Oh, of course. And I would have to agree with the last officer that said this training was about being a better person. And what better way to be a better officer by being at peace with yourself, that inner peace, and knowing that you can trust your peers, and being able to go to a radio call, and like Lyndon said, that situational awareness, instead of always being that tense, you kind of know when to turn it on, turn it off, go in and out. Just be aware of yourself, your surroundings, the community, wherever you're going, and just taking that extra deep breath and knowing where you're at and how you're going to deal with that particular situation without having to rush into something.
Now, Ron, you were a supervisor in the department. How did you see officers responding to the huddles? What impacts did you see it have on relations with the communities you serve?
Doing the huddles and the breathing exercises together, I think it really brought more trust and respect amongst the team members. And, we saw each other as equals. I had to do my job as supervisor, but at the same time, I looked at everybody as, as individuals. And it really resonated, with me and how I deal with everybody, including the community. I'm out there in the community. I'm being vulnerable too. There's a time not to be vulnerable during some major tactical situation. But there are times that we can be vulnerable, and so we can better hear the community out and see what they want and see how we can better serve them.
Now, your group did these every week for 6 months, I believe, although the span of the program is now down to 3, as we saw on the earlier slide. But when you were going through it, did it feel like too much of a time commitment to ask of yourself and the officers who worked for you, Ron?
No, actually, as soon as we went through those first 2 days, we were instantly hooked. I was looking forward to the weekly emails that we got. And the emails are, yes, you have to do it yourself. You have to be interested. And you do these exercises, the breathing, the exercises that come along with these emails. And you start doing it. And when they came back for the other 2 sessions, we couldn't wait to see them. We were all very into it. We were into it the first 2 times, but the second time around, we were extremely into it. Very happy to see Jared, very happy to see Ann, very happy to see the team, because we know how this helped us. The 6 months was not a long commitment at all, because ultimately, this is for your life. This is for your health. This is, God willing, you have 25, 30 years on the job. And I know that this right here will help you achieve that. And even during retirement, as I am, I'm practicing these things as we speak. I'm actively going through these things, with my family as well. Because when do you have an opportunity within your family to actually sit down in the huddle and allow somebody to speak without being interrupted, and they're able to maybe get something off their chest that maybe happened in the family that they've never talked about. So, it improved relationships all around.
I think that often officers tell us that they're taking this home and using these skills with their families. It's something that they've learned to do as part of their ability to function well, but they're also finding that it has great benefit in their lives. And I just want to reiterate here that the huddles are this practice group that unpack the curriculum that's being sent to folks on a regular basis. They support retention of the material and accountability to a peer group. You are there and you're in it and you're accountable, which is a kind of an interesting sort of twist here. You're accountable to each other. And they give folks a chance to sort of step away from the craziness, shift away from judgment, and really talk about things that are important. Like I said, it's sort of like a peer support before a critical incident happens. And it is a place that folks value because it's informal, but it's an intentional conversation about important issues with peers who have lived experience. It feels good to be vulnerable. It feels good to talk about what's really important. The Council Huddle resource becomes a touch point for folks. and the skills that they develop give them the ability to connect authentically and appropriately, and they translate into their lives. I will say that procedural justice asks us to listen and make sure that the community members feel listened to, and listening to your peers without judgment in the council huddles builds that muscle for community interactions.
We've alluded to some of the research and evaluation work that is going on around this program. And could you talk a little bit more about that work and what you're doing to help determine impact and what some of the early research is saying?
These guys have all mentioned they did 6 months based on the feedback we got from them. We've pruned it to 3 months. It's been really good to see with the surveys that we've administered that it didn't lose its impact. That's the same things that we were seeing these guys benefit after 6 months, we're still seeing that benefit after 3 months. So what we had done with both the 6 and 3 month cohorts was administer validated psychosocial scales before and after. These are Likert scales. So we got both qualitative comments from the guys as well as quantitative assessment from these scales. We found that there were things that were statistically significant, meaning that there was a big enough shift that we could say purely what was done in that 3 months or 6 months resulted in officers being more mindful, having better emotion regulation, having increased empathy, and decreased perception of stress and anger in their environment.
It's interesting to hear that it isn't just about how you feel in your mind, but that there's actually biometric measures that you can see change in. I mean, it seems like every new gadget you buy these days can track your heart rate variability. And I think you even mentioned it earlier as well, Anne, but what is that exactly?
You know, the things that officers were talking about, the lower blood pressure and having less headaches and sleeping better, made me think that there was shifts happening in their autonomic nervous system over the training program that we could measure. You know, it used to be we would measure cortisol, which was, you know, blood samples or hair samples, really kind of practically difficult to do. But heart rate variability is something, like you say, it's ubiquitous, and we have devices that measure it. It's just a matter of putting on a probe on finger or an earlobe and measuring the beat-to-beat variation in heart rate that shifts. And healthy people have high heart rate variability. It means that their nervous systems can adapt quickly. When they need to go, their heart rate can go up fast. When the crisis is over, it goes down fast. And conversely, people who have low heart rate variability are really prone to the same diseases that we've been talking about. They have more inflammation, they get diabetes, they get heart disease, hypertension, early death from any cause. You know, all things that Violante's research talked about almost 20 years ago. But we're now finding that if we measure HRV before and after, we get a whole lot of information. And as we analyze that information, one of the domains that we're measuring is called the very low frequency, or VLF. And we know from other research that an improvement in VLF translates to improved health, to decreased inflammation, to decreased hemoglobin A1C, which is a measurement of diabetes. Already we're seeing this shift, that before the program to after the program, their VLF domain increases significantly. Another fascinating result that we didn't expect to see is that their HRV pattern changed. Over the 3 months, they became more coherent. And what coherence is sort of shown by these two graphs. On the left, an incoherent pattern shows up when you're anxious or worried or frustrated. The graph on the right is a coherent pattern, and that shows up when you experience more positive emotions, most strongly gratitude. We know that teams that really function well together, think of like Navy SEALs or sports teams that really get into this state of flow. When that happens, they are coherent in themselves and with each other. they perform better and they're more physically connected to each other. We also know from the surveys that the San Marcos group filled out that they had statistically significant increases in social connection, as well as this increase in coherence that happened over the 12 weeks. That's what this connection is that people are taking outside of the program into their lives, into the communities, is this sense of coherence in themselves. When you can regulate yourself and become coherent, it starts to bleed over into the people around you. This, ability to go into a room and bring the tone of the energy down, I think is because people become coherent with each other. I wonder, now that we've gotten a couple years out, are you guys still seeing any physical changes, or what has continued to catch your attention?
I had some health problems. I had blood pressure issues. I had some heart palpitations, and I started with the breathing exercises, the meditation, and it lowered my blood pressure, and I didn't have to take the medication anymore. And it took away the heart palpitation. I says, wow, I didn't need all the stuff with the doctor. All I needed was this right here. It might sound cliche. A lot of people say that, but I know for a fact that this works 100%.
I remember when we had the training, and Jared towards the end said, just try it before you get to your house, before you get off your car to decompress. And that has helped out tremendously. Now I do it before I go into work. It makes you more at ease. And, I use it at home as well. Man, it helps with the relationship at home with my kids. My kids are even sleeping better because we try to do that before bed. So it helps them help me. And I do it with them as well. And it's just, I try to do it as much as I can with whoever I can. And it could be at home or at work. It only takes 5 minutes to do a breathing exercise, and it just changes your mentality, and even you feel even better physically. You just want to go out there and walk around, and interact with people. So that's really good.
I still continue to this day. I still apply it to personal life, work life, to stay in this kind of like calm state, even though things around aren't necessarily calm. But if it does help, kind of like you're the thermostat. You can if you're calm, you kind of help everyone else remain kind of calm around you. So I do focus on, keep being that kind of like Zen state for myself, along for to impact everyone else.
Just the breathing, that's a given, no doubt about it. But it's also about the meaningful conversations to have with your friends, with your family members, to actually hear what they're saying instead of interrupting them in the middle of it. So I've learned that from this type of training. And also just to have a lot of gratitude, toward being present in the moment while having that conversation.
I just think this is really exciting to hear these things from these guys that we had hoped was going to be an effect of the power program. And then when you see it actually happen in people is really exciting.
So I think the discussion has been really good at helping us all understand the premise and to some extent the science behind the power program. I'd like to get in a little bit into why this would matter in law enforcement agencies, because it really does sound like this could be important on a number of fronts. Ron, I'm going to turn to you. Why do you think this is important to policing?
This kind of training is necessary. I understand that, and patrol officers, they go to call. Okay, just spend an extra 2 minutes. It would make a world of difference with opening those doors and relationships, have a better police perception overall. And I think overall it improves safety for us as officers and safety for the community.
Do you see this as any way being in conflict with the tactical training that officers receive that is specifically meant to keep them safe on the job and ensure they get home at the end of the shift?
No, not at all. I myself, I teach at a police academy now that I'm retired. And what do I teach? I teach tactics. And so I can understand why some of this training can have an officer or a department believe that it can slow down the decision-making process, which is far from the truth. We are heavily in a state of de-escalation. And de-escalation is taking the time, using tactics, having the distance, and dealing with the situation, with an even head so that you are making better decisions out there. You don't want to be in a hypervigilant state. We've seen it on TV, not being judgmental, but we've seen some of the bad mistakes that officers are making, believing that maybe they need to be hypervigilant all the time. And the decisions cost the city and liability issues. It costs the officers, maybe their job, maybe their freedom. It costs the community heartache with maybe some unfortunate shootings. This kind of training does not conflict in any way with going home at the end of every night. This kind of training is needed more than ever, I think, right now in policing, and I hope that more people do it.
I have to say that the power training program is one of many, and some are terrific out there. This program is very robust. Not all agencies are ready for this deep a dive, and we get that. I believe that any progress is good progress. This is a crisis that we're dealing with, and if it's an app or a workshop or a book or better sleep or a new approach to nutrition, it's all good. We need many approaches. There are many styles, but we know that this works. We know that this program is effective and it works because it's so robust. This makes officers healthier. It makes them more effective on the job. It makes them better able to handle work-life balance, and they become more engaged in the community, which is the undergirding of procedural justice. I think most importantly, though, officers really enjoy this program. They find it to be really beneficial and they want more of it.
We need this kind of training. It literally improves morale within our own department, within our own units, to be able to work together, to talk about problems, to be open, to be vulnerable with each other. It increases safety overall because, we're understanding the community, we're taking our time, you're being present, and we're aware of our own emotions to better make good decisions out there, to be able to see the bigger picture, if you will. Not only that, but this kind of training is going to help with the liability issues. And every department knows that when it comes to civil liability, this kind of wellness training to make better decisions out there is definitely needed. But most importantly, overall, is the health of the officer.
Everyone talk about police reform and culture change, and I really feel like this is very impactful. This is how you change culture. This is how you redefine public safety. It starts with building this really heightened sense of engagement between officers and team members, and then how it spills over and impacts the community you serve. And even in that, reduces crime, but it starts within the culture first, and then it will impact the community.
I gotta say, the training that we had, we were blessed or lucky. I do wish this training could be department-wide because it could make an impact, not just on the officers' lives, but on the community and the department as a whole. I stand by it, and I believe it's something that can really impact law enforcement.
We are out of time. So I would just like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, to the audience who has tuned in to watch us in this virtual format, and lastly to the IACP for giving us the chance to be a part of this very important conference on officer safety and wellness. Thank you.